patient listening by all of you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Lieutenant General Subrata Saha, for that very, very exhaustive presentation on what the Indian Army's various landmarks starting from the 40s till the present time. Now, at the end of these two presentations by the panelists, coupled with the broad introduction during the keynote address by Mr. Swapan Dasgupta, I think as part of the plan, I think there will be a brief question and answer session. We'd like to keep it brief because the Chief Minister of Meghalaya, Sri Conrad Sangma, is already in our midst. He will be speaking next, but let's have an open house very quickly. Any questions, kindly identify yourself and address to the respective panelists. Or if it is open, any one of them can take the question.
Good morning, sir. I'm Colonel G.S. Maan. My question is for Professor David Syirmlieh. Thank you so much, sir, for your very, very illuminating historical perspective on the freedom fighters of the Northeast region. And as you mentioned, probably their stories still not fully there in the national imagination. I think some steps have been taken in this regard. One of the major ones being the inauguration of the Amrit Udyan, which has been done in August of this year at Guwahati itself. But I mean, other than the the freedom fighters that you mentioned, there are so many stories. I was reading about Maniram Diwan. He was, from a privileged background, an ally of the British, one of the first tea planters in Assam, and he was so inspired by the 1857 revolt that he thereafter sacrificed his life for the freedom of the country. So, in your opinion and with your experience, what are the measures that can be taken to further propagate the glorious saga of the freedom fighters of the Northeast region, especially in the hinterland, in the national media, and also on a much larger scale in various parts of the country? Thank you very much,
Professor.
As a teacher, I think I'm loud enough. Thank you very much, Colonel Maan. I think academics have to come together to bring together the stories. There is a necessity for the universities to put together good research. And when I say good research, I gave one indication in my address, how we play into oral traditions. One of the issues in looking at the role of freedom fighters is getting out of what was the Itihas tradition of what was to what we believe. Now, belief is something very different than what was in the past, the Indian tradition of writing history. And I think the universities would do well to put together a text. What I must say is, when you go around the universities today, you find JNU doing an excellent job, Allahabad University doing a marvelous, Banaras Hindu University, Hyderabad. The process has started. But I think the National Book Trust, the publication houses, and seminars such as this would contribute towards a better understanding of the Northeast. As of now, there is no history text, and I'm a historian. There is no history text which one can take out from the shelf and say, this is the contribution of the Northeast. It's piecemeal. It's piecemeal. It's in Assamese, it's in Bangla, it's in Khasi. And we take great pride in our own little identities, but it has to be fused together. And I think this fusing together and writing together and its publication in, after seminars and good discussion would be very fruitful. Kublai.
Right. May I request those who ask the questions to be brief when they ask the questions, please.
नमस्कार, मैं एन अर्जुन अमर उजाला दिल्ली से हूँ. और मेरा सवाल साहा जी से है, सुब्रता साहा जी। आपने बहुत ही अच्छा प्रेजेंटेशन दिया। एक चीज जो मैं दिल्ली में रहता हूँ और मेरा जन्म असम का है, मैंने जो महसूस किया है कि किस तरह से हमारे पूर्वोत्तर को उत्तर भारत या दक्षिण भारत के लोग नहीं जानते हैं। तो आर्मी ईस्टर्न कमांड या आप लोग कुछ ऐसा कर रहे हैं कि वो सांस्कृतिक आदान प्रदान हो या वैचारिक विचार विमर्श, कुछ ऐसा आप लोग कर रहे हैं कि जो नॉर्थ ईस्ट में जो पोटेंशियल है या नॉर्थ ईस्ट जो बाकी में है उसको रेस्ट इंडिया जो उत्तर भारत के लोग को जान सके। क्या आप लोग कुछ ऐसा कर रहे हैं?
सबसे पहले मैं आपका बहुत आभारी हूं कि आपने इतने महत्वपूर्ण सवाल हमसे पूछा है, क्योंकि ये सवाल सिर्फ हमारे लिए नहीं है, ये सवाल यहाँ पे जितने लोग बैठे हैं उन सब के साथ ये ताल्लुक रखता है। देखिए आज क्या कर रहे हैं हम, मैं समझता हूँ यहाँ के पूर्वोत्तर के जो बच्चे हैं, स्कूल के कॉलेज के बच्चे हैं, इनको ग्रुप्स बना करके देश के विभिन्न किनारों में ले जाया जाता है और सद्भावना के तहत, और वहां पर जाकर के इनको उन प्रांत के स्कूल के बच्चों के साथ, कॉलेज के बच्चों के साथ में उनका कुछ एक्सचेंज का प्रबंध किया जाता है। उसी प्रकार से वहां पे जो किस प्रकार की इंडस्ट्री तरक्की कर गई है, किस प्रकार वहां पे डेवलपमेंट है, तो इस तरह से उन्हें अवगत कराया जाता है, तो कि उनको उनके अंदर ये जो उन्नति और जो 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 प्रोग्रेस हो रहा है उसका एक एहसास हो और उसके मैसेंजर बन के यहाँ पे आ सके। बट क्या ये सफिशिएंट है? द आंसर इज नो। कैन मोर बी डन? द आंसर इज यस। व्हाट कैन बी डन, लाइक यू जस्ट सजेस्टेड, इट इज वेरी मच पॉसिबल टू डू, invite for example people from there also to come here and come and do, and especially in today's world, one of the positives of COVID has been this great mushrooming of webinars. I think it's a great way by which we can make these connections at much lesser cost than it was happening in the past. And if I were to take one line from what Dr. David was saying, he mentioned Allahabad University. In fact, my doctorate is from there. He mentioned BHU. I think more and more universities from other parts of the country get interested over here. You cannot leave it just to Don Bosco Museum of Shillong to keep telling over people of the Northeast. You are telling a few tourists and telling people of Northeast what is Northeast. I think there is a requirement of going out and putting it over there.
Right.
Take an example from what China has done in terms of the Confucius institutes all over the world. I mean, at least the least we can do it across the country. Then there is no harm in learning a good lesson from anybody. So I think in short that would be an answer.
The officer
एक
there.
सवाल सर, मेरा डेविड सर से एक सवाल था सर।
The officer here, please. You raised your hands. Yeah.
Actually, I would like to include something. He already pointed out a very good question. Northeastern University already did some work in this area, and after implementation of new education policy signed and allowed with more than 20 university and institute to act for the cultural exchange with the different states of the country, not only the different state of the country, also with the other
5 more minutes. 5 minutes.
Other,
5 minutes.
And 22nd of this month going to organize a mega event for the cultural exchange.
Yes, please. We'll take 2 more questions. Yes.
Roger. Good morning, sir. I'm Brigadier Sanjeev Chopra. Sincere gratitude and thanks to eminent panelists for an insightful talk. As General Saha sir has recommended in the end of the talk, that these are the various recommendations by which we can integrate the northeastern region better. Sir, I would just like to get your views on 2 very important factors for the same. One is the upgradation of infrastructure and some concept like what China has done, well of villages along the border, and also leveraging the tourism. What can be a better ecosystem for doing so, and how can we leverage the both? Thank you, sir.
You see, I think the most important thing is in terms of the physical part of it, is the way we are developing the infrastructure. Because unless and until the infrastructure comes, you can't have tourists. But the flip side, we must also know, is when you have a large influx of tourists, it can be detrimental to several things. So where you find the right balance, I think is important. Whether you're talking it in terms of balancing the ecological requirements, making sure that it remains swachh as you would want it to remain swachh. So that is the good balancing act, which is important. But equally important, is, I think, the psychological dimension. And that psychological dimension is, we just heard the Vice Chancellor of NEHU, I think, who is mentioning what they are taking. I think this is the need of the hour for literally every academic institutions. And why only academic institutions? For all of us, who represent different parts of the country in the Northeast, and like Assam regiment that represents the Indian Army, the Northeast to the rest of the Indian Army. I think each one of them has got a role to play. Permit me a small anecdote, Chair. We had started this warrior dance in the Assam regiment. That warrior dance became so popular that at one stage in 2016, it was put on display during a border personnel meet, not in the Northeast, but in Chushul. So that is the kind of impact which you can make within and outside the country if you choose to actually push it. And as you all would agree with me, this is not a very high investment job. It can be done very easily.
All right. If there is no more questions, basically, there's two presentations by Professor David Syirmlieh on the contribution of the Northeastern region in India's freedom struggle, and by Lieutenant General Saha on the contribution of the Indian Army. 2-3 points have emerged. I'll just take 2 minutes to end this session. Basically, Professor David talked about how the rest of the region, rest of the country is not aware of the contributions of the freedom fighters from the region and so on. This brings us to the question, that is the reason why perhaps the Assam government, as I have said in the beginning, is organizing the Lasit Divas, the 400 birth anniversary celebrations of the great general in Delhi in such a mega scale. That brings to the question whether there is need to refocus our history to give Northeast its due place. Perhaps the answer is certainly yes. How you refocus, whether one single historian can refocus, can achieve this objective, unless there is a concerted effort on the part of the academia and the government to come together. We have the Indian History Congress and so on. We have the Indian History Congress as chapters in the Northeastern region. I think there's the need for the historians, writers, academicians, intellectuals, researchers, the government, the political class in the Northeast, perhaps to work together so that our icons, whether they're freedom fighters, whether they're icons in other fields, get their due in the national arena. That is something we need to introspect, and that is something which has come out of the presentation. Secondly, General Subrata Saha has given a very, very exhaustive account of the various milestones that the Indian Army has been thrown into to deal with in the Northeastern region, and how successfully they have dealt with it right from the time of India's independence, or even before that, is something which he has put on record. But one point I'd like to make, the contribution of the Indian Army in nation building, as I have said right at the beginning, that for everything there is the Indian Army, and goes out of its call of duty. But when, for example, the Indian Army, various units, various formations across the Northeastern region, when they collect a group of youths from the Northeast, take them out on what they call a Bharat Darshan, I think these are some of the efforts that the Indian Army is doing in the Northeastern region. Not that they are a bunch of hardcore fighters who are out to dominate a situation, but the Indian Army has proved time and again, I have been witnessing in the last nearly 4 decades of being a journalist and watching the situation in the Northeastern region, how the Indian Army has interacted, has been maintaining this interface with the people, and most of them are positive. There was a time during Ops Bajrang when the Indian Army was at that point of time they were in a shell, they were in some kind of a cocoon, they were not interacting with the media, and therefore they were not being able to reach out to the people. And I remember during that time, the GOC of the Four Corps, at the time, Lieutenant General R.K. Sauni, he discussed what is to be done. I said, please emerge, Fred, tell your officers to come out of the cocoon, because as professional journalists, we don't expect all of you to come and tell me each and everything that you know. I am not expecting that. But when I'm covering something, I expect at least to the level that you can say, should be told, so that there is no misinformation circulating around, or so that the truth emerges. I think that has happened. Over the years, the Indian Army has been, they've been interacting a lot with the media, and through that, they have been able to reach out to the people. And people have also been able to appreciate the good work of the Indian Army. I think this interface needs to continue, as General Saha has also mentioned. I think this has been an excellent presentation by the two panelists, and I thank the Eastern Command, the GOC-in-C and General Panchanathan for giving me this opportunity to participate in this very enlightening engagement this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
May I now request Lieutenant General K.C. Panchanathan, Ati Vishish Seva Medal, General Officer Commanding 101 Area, to present mementos to the distinguished speakers of this session. Shri Wasbir Hussain. Professor David R. Syirmlieh. Lieutenant General Subrata Saha. Shri Swapan Dasgupta. Ladies and gentlemen, with this we conclude the first session of today's panel discussion. We will begin our second session in 30 minutes. I now invite you all to join us for a cup of tea.